Today's video is brought to you by Squarespace. Having proper bed adhesion is often the difference between a successful and a failed print. When I first got into 3D printing back in 2014, this was one of my biggest pain points. From manually leveling the bed and dialing in Z offsets to picking the right surface and slicer settings, I had plenty of successes and just as many failures. A lot of that changed through experience and the discovery of powder-coated PEI. That has been a game changer to me, and I've stuck with a relatively similar formula ever since. Around 6 or 7 years ago, Vision Miner released a product called Nano Polymer Adhesive, a liquid formula intended to help with bed adhesion. At first, I was skeptical and primarily viewed it as a band-aid for someone that was using improper settings, but in time, my attitudes changed. I've used it on and off with a handful of different materials, and I've gotten a lot of questions about it. In this video, we'll dive into Nano Polymer Adhesive, go over how to apply it, do some adhesion testing, and I'll give you my overall thoughts based on my experience using it. So with all that being said, and without further ado, let's get right into today's video. Let's start by taking a look at the material itself. Hopping over to the product page, there's a bit of info here that I think is important to cover. Vision Miner states that this formula was designed for PEEK, PEI, and other high-temp materials. This is great for the more industrial space, and it makes a lot of sense given the printers that they actually resell, but these are not materials that most of us are going to be printing with. However, if we go further down the page, we can see an exhaustive list of the materials that it's compatible with. In short, with the exception of POM and polypropylene, they state that it works with just about everything. Now, this all sounds great, but there are some things to be cautious of. For starters, the build plate material you use is a really important factor. I exclusively use this adhesive on powder-coated PEI, and while I'd argue that that is the most common build surface used today, I urge caution if you are printing on glass. Glass really used to be the golden standard. It's still used on some industrial machines out there, and I don't doubt that at least a handful of you watching this video have an old printer somewhere that is still using a pane of glass clamped down to the build plate. So what's the issue? Well, if we look at the bottom of the material information paragraph, Vision Miner states that the material can withstand a pull force of over 20,000 psi. Strong adhesion is what we want, but when we're working with materials that are shrinking as they're cooling and the base is glass, that can lead to some issues. I've personally seen a glass bed chip and then crack when trying to remove a high-temp material from that surface. There's a section on the product page with some tips for anyone printing on glass at over 300 Celsius, with the primary thing being just remove the part while it's hot so it doesn't begin to want to pull away. However, my general recommendation is to just avoid a glass build plate with this adhesive if at all possible. The other thing I want to warn is that the adhesive does contain isopropyl alcohol, so it's flammable. Most of us are probably already using IPA to clean our build plate, and when applied, it does evaporate quickly, but it does mean you'll want to store it somewhere out of reach or somewhere that is safe. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform designed to help you stand out and succeed online. Whether you're starting something new or expanding your brand, Squarespace has everything you need to build a clean, professional website. I built my ModBot Army site on Squarespace to have a central location for everything I do, from videos, sponsor info, and a place for people to reach out. What immediately impressed me was how simple it was to get started. Their Blueprint AI asked me a few simple questions about my goals, and then automatically generated a great looking layout to build from. Their drag and drop editor makes customizing it easy, but what I've really been appreciating since then is how easy it is to update. So if you've been thinking about launching your own site, head to squarespace.com/modbot to start your free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use code MODBOT for 10% off your first purchase of website or a domain. For our machine, we're going to be using the Cheedy Q2, a printer that I got in a while ago for some testing. Before applying any of the adhesive, you need to make sure your build plate is nice and clean. Shake the bottle to make sure everything is mixed, and then remove the cap from the applicator. With the tip of the bottle against your build plate, squeeze while drawing an X. Then make a circle around that X. This is the exact method shown by Vision Miner in their how to use video, and it's the way I have always done it. Then take the included brush and brush the liquid back and forth both horizontally and vertically. I'll usually go back and forth with the brush a couple of times just to make sure I didn't miss any section of the build plate. Then let it sit for a couple of minutes so that the liquid can dry. The included brush works really well for applying the adhesive, but I found that even with me trying to clean it and maintain it, after a while, and certainly before making my way through the bottle, it either falls apart or just hardens. So when that happens, what I do is just throw on a pair of gloves and use a paper towel to apply the adhesive. Also, this stuff is not cheap, and this 120mm bottle I'm using goes for right around $45. The good news is that a little goes a long way, and you absolutely, in most cases, should not be reapplying this for every single print. The material you're printing with will have an impact on how many uses you get from each application, but Vision Miner states that for a general material like PLA or PTG, one application should last for 50 or more prints. Now it's time to do some testing. I spent a fair bit of time trying to determine how I best wanted to test out this adhesive, but ultimately I ended up deciding on a bed adhesion warping test from Extratim. This model is of a thin rectangle standing up with one side being supported by a cone foot. For this test, I printed in a number of materials using the same build plate. I'd run the test on one side without any adhesive, then flip that same bed over and print with the exact same settings on the side that I had applied the adhesive to. You can sort of see the adhesive after it's dried if you lift up the build plate at just the right angle, but in order to not confuse myself on which side I was printing on, I just took a Sharpie and made a mark on the side that had the adhesive. Then I printed PLA, PTG, ABS, ASA, carbon fiber nylon, and polycarbonate parts. Let's quickly rule out the nothing burgers. PLA, PTG, and carbon fiber nylon printed on both sides of the build plate without any issues, so there was absolutely nothing to compare. For all materials that had existing profiles in Qidi Studio, I kept all of these settings stock. For ABS specifically, the only profile available was under generic, and while the Qi 2 does have an active heated chamber, the profile had it set to 0, so I did not run the heated chamber while printing out ABS. For the part without adhesive, it began warping at about 25%, but it still held on to the build plate and was able to complete. The part with adhesive also warped, but didn't start until about 65 to 70% way through the print. If we put these two parts side by side, you can really see the difference between how much more the part without adhesive warped. Moving on to ASA. For this, the slicer profile had the active heated chamber enabled, and as you'd expect, it warped less, but both parts still warped. Compared to the ABS prints, the difference between the warping on the ASA parts was much less drastic. However, the one not using adhesive definitely warped more, and you can really see this by the bulgy line that was caused by the layers underneath it curling up and just making that layer inconsistent. The last of these warp tests consisted of printing with polycarbonate, which is a material really known to warp. There wasn't any profiles available in the Qidi Studio software for this material, so I just used the parameters outlined on Polymaker's product page to build a quick profile. Well, both of these parts warped pretty bad, and doing a side-by-side, there's not much of a difference. I would argue that the one with the adhesive stuck a little bit more, but the difference is marginal at best. After completing these tests, I started to think that while the test did exactly what I wanted to, which was stress test the bed adhesive, it was a pretty extreme scenario. As I mentioned, I've used this adhesive for quite a while, and it saved me a number of times, but those times when I was printing, I wasn't printing torture tests. Because of this and polycarbonate warping nearly equally between those two, I wanted to run one final test. For this, I found a model of a water bottle holder attachment for a bike, a functional part with some overhangs, and while the base on it isn't massive, I wanted to see how polycarbonate and the adhesive would perform when the footprint was spread out over a slightly larger area. I sliced up the file using the exact same settings as we used for the torture test and printed it out both on the side with the adhesive and the side without the adhesive. For the side without, it started warping pretty quickly, and at about the halfway point, I was really impressed that it was actually still holding on to the build plate. Well, I probably should have stopped the print there, because when I came back 15 minutes later, the hot end was just air printing and the part had shifted off of the build plate. Swapping to the side with the adhesive, I was up here sort of monitoring the print up to the halfway point, and I saw zero signs of warping. I still wasn't convinced that I wouldn't get at least a little bit of warping as it got further and further away from the build plate and got towards the top, but when the print completed and the plate dropped and I removed it, it was stuck firmly to the powder-coated PEI. This has largely been my experience with this adhesive when used for printing out ABS or ASA. Overall, the way I've always used Nano Polymer adhesive is more reactive than proactive. I don't use it for PLA, and for PTG, ABS, or ASA, it either has to be a really large part that I'm concerned with or a batch of parts that I've noticed, hey, we're having some issues in this section, and I'll put a little bit of the adhesive on and run the print again. Or if I'm printing with a engineering material that I've purchased that is just an expensive material and I want that added insurance. That's actually how I often describe it, as added insurance. I still feel strongly that it's not an excuse for not leveling a bed or improperly setting your Z offset or slicer settings, but it has proven itself to be a valuable supplementary tool in my bag of 3D printing tricks. And that's been Nano Polymer adhesive. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you have a better idea of what it is, how to use it, and whether it makes sense for your specific setup. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to answer. And as always, if I don't know the answer to your questions, I have no problem reaching out to Vision Miner directly to try to get those answers for you. If you are wanting to find out more about this adhesive or pick up a bottle for yourself, I will have it linked in the description. On that note, don't forget to like and subscribe for more great videos. We make a video just about every single week, so there's always fresh content coming your way. And if you want to support the channel further, I'll have links in the description over to our Patreon, where there are some really awesome rewards. Huge thank you to all of our existing Patreon supporters. I appreciate each and every one of you for allowing me to come back every single week and spend more time doing what I love, which is making content for you all to enjoy. On that note, this has been Daniel from ModBot, and I look forward to seeing you guys in my next video. Peace, guys!